Hey everybody, today we're going to go through some of my predictions and we're going to see how well I did. Now everything is still not final, but I think we have a pretty good idea of where things are headed. So let's start here with my final prediction for president. And on this, my safe margins are 10 or more points, likely 5 to 10, lean under 5, and tilt 1% or less. So I did get the overall result right. And if I was way off, I probably wouldn't be doing a video on it. So I've got some bragging rights because a lot of people did have Harris winning it, but it was still fairly close in enough of the swing states. I don't think there's any shame if you had the wrong prediction unless you had Harris winning it very comfortably. If you predict enough elections, you're definitely going to get some of them wrong, as we've seen with Alan Lichtman. But let's see what we're looking at here. I had Trump at 291, Harris at 247. The only two states I got wrong were Nevada and Michigan. 2 out of the 7 battlegrounds, not bad at all. Both of those tilt margins, they could have gone either way. I was reluctant to give Harris Michigan because that's different than Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I would think that all 3 of those states are more likely to vote in one direction, but I thought his weakest state might have been Michigan. That's why I thought she could pull it out. I usually think Wisconsin is the reddest of those 3 states. Even though the polling might have showed it a little bit different, I thought that one was most likely to go to Trump. Pennsylvania was a tough call. There was enough early vote data there that I decided I'm going to give it to him, and it looks like that paid off. I think at the time I'm making this, Wisconsin actually had the narrowest margin of those 3 states. Still close, where Harris was definitely in it, but not an extreme nail-biter. Now, North Carolina, I thought that was fairly likely to go to Trump. I thought he would get it by at least 1.5, so I'm pretty comfortable with that rating. Then in Georgia, I thought that would be about 1% for Trump, so I put it at a tilt. Looks like it's going to be a little bit over that. Now in the Southwest and Arizona, that one I had at a lean for Trump. I thought immigration would put him over the top there. I know his brand is not exactly what they're looking for in Maricopa County, but he was able to win the state by at least 1%. Here in Nevada, there still might be some vote outstanding. I don't like seeing that at all, where we have to wait days, maybe even a week, until we can get a final result. But either way, I got that call right. And then in Nevada, I did have this one barely going to Harris. I thought it would narrow up from the margin in 2020, but it was probably going to be under a half a point for Harris. Looks like Trump managed to flip it. He gets full credit on that one. Now, a couple of other states I've got to talk about are Iowa and Ohio. Both of these I had just barely under a safe margin for Trump. That seltzer poll in Iowa, I never bought that for a second. I don't think most people did. So a little bit of a regret there, not putting both of those at safe. Certainly in Iowa, because that's easily over 10 points. Now in Minnesota, that one I had it likely for Harris. I think I was at about 5 to 6 points on it. So it looks like she did about 1 to 2 points better than I had anticipated. The rating is different, but overall the result is pretty close. Now a couple other states to point out on here. I'm sure we're going to be talking about these in the future. Texas and Florida. I had those at likely for Trump. And there's not much I could say. Trump just outperformed what I thought he was capable of doing. Certainly in Texas, but also in Florida. Those were massive double-digit wins. I did think if he had a really good night, he could get it over 10, maybe even 11, but he even exceeded that. There's a lot of reasons behind that. Again, we'll get to that in future videos. If we look at Illinois, we've still got to wait for the final result, but that one could be under 10, and that would be a big improvement for Trump. I don't think many people saw that getting down to potentially single digits. Perhaps the biggest one is going to be New Jersey. That one looks like it's for sure under 10, and I always thought that of the blue states in the Northeast on the East Coast, New Jersey would be the most likely to get under 10, but looks like everybody was pretty much wrong. Trump easily got this down under 10. New York was also a little bit redder than I was expecting, and then New Hampshire, that one I had at likely for Harris, but it's under 5. He overperformed by a couple of points. I thought she would get it right at about 5, so I'm not way off, but again, if you focus on the rating, it looks like I missed it. But of course, I got the overall winner correct. And then in Virginia, we're going to wait for that final margin there, but that one was easily way under 10 points like it was in 2020. Now we can't forget about Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. Looks like that one actually might be under 5 points for Harris. So Trump overperformed there. I thought that would be over 5, not way over, but certainly probably 5 to 6, maybe 7 points. And in Maine's 2nd, that one I also had as likely for Trump. I thought about putting that up to safe. I thought it was close, but it finished at likely. So overall, pretty good prediction. I think I'm pretty happy with it. Now, if we go back to my next prediction, this is July 11th. Then this was before Biden actually dropped out of the race. There was some speculation about Harris maybe taking over if it happened. So I put out this hypothetical matchup, and this is what it looked like. This map is a lot closer to the actual result. I thought at the time time, Harris was a relatively weak candidate, all things considered. She had the honeymoon period, she got new enthusiasm for the Dems, but ultimately this is kind of what the final map ended up looking like. I think Trump still clearly overperformed in Texas and Florida, but I think the rest of these states are all pretty much spot on with the margins, except for Maine's 2nd congressional district. So if I was looking to brag, I think this was a pretty great call, but of course anything could happen between July and the election. I happen to get lucky this time. I'm sure in the future I'm going to have a bunch of misses. I definitely had some in the 2022 midterms. I did overestimate the Republicans with pretty much everybody else. Now here's my map from September 19th, and this was the best case scenario for Donald Trump. And this is also not too far off from the actual result. I did have Colorado getting just barely under 10. The actual result, of course, is still over 10, but it's not way over 10. Here I do have Texas as safe, so I'm going to point that out. Florida, I still didn't see it. I had it probably at about 9.5. So Trump really dominated there, as well as in the Midwest. I did have the Rust Belt going red, all by lean margins. I also had Minnesota, Virginia, and New Hampshire all under 5 points. And I had Nebraska 2nd down to a tilt. But of course, I did not have New Jersey getting down under 10. In this, I think it did get just over 10 points. It was borderline. That is the first state I would take down under 10. But Trump had a unique appeal in some different states in some different parts of the country with some different demographics. Overall, Trump does look like he got close to what I thought his best case scenario would have been. And then let's wind it down here by taking a look at my Senate prediction. So here again, we still might have to wait for the final results for some of these margins, but I had Republicans at 52, Democrats at 48. The states that I got wrong are going to be Pennsylvania, where Dave McCormick actually has flipped that seat and knocked out Bob Casey. But I did underestimate Sheehy in Montana and definitely Ted Cruz in Texas. For Cruz, I had that at likely Republican the entire year. At the very end, I thought it would just barely dip down under 5, so I took it down to leans. But he did a lot better than I expected. Also, Rick Scott in Florida. For a while, I said he was not really that strong of a candidate, but he certainly outperformed my expectations and got that up into double digits. If Rick Scott runs again, I think it's going to be very difficult to underestimate his support. But yeah, Tester really didn't put up much of a fight there in Montana. Bernie Moreno in Ohio, that was a tough call for me. I did give it to Moreno. I thought Brown would have made it a little bit more competitive, but Trump did so well, he pulled Moreno over the finish line. I didn't think Nebraska would really end up being that competitive. Looks like I was correct. The other former blue wall states I thought would go to the Democrats. It looked like the Republicans were ahead there for a little while, but overall those were much more narrow margins than I thought they would have been 6 months ago. Republicans definitely came out for those Senate candidates. Late breakers moved in their direction. Not enough to flip Wisconsin and Michigan, but I thought the Dems should have had an easier time holding those seats. Nevada looks like I'm going to get that one correct. I never thought it would be 8, 10, or 12 points for Rosen like we saw in some of those polls. It looked like Sam Brown might have been able to pull it out, but now it looks like he's going to come up short. Good race there. Looks like I got that call right. And Arizona takes a very long time to count their ballots. It's completely disappointing, and I would also say that it's embarrassing. So I'm going to assume that I got it correct and Gallego prevails. So I think I had some pretty good calls here, although I did underestimate Larry Hogan in Maryland. He did a few points better than I expected, and you could probably say the same thing about Hung Kao in Virginia. A little bit better than my final rating, but ultimately I'm not too surprised there. And finally, since the Republicans won this one, let's take a look at my Senate map for the best case scenario for the GOP. This one I did have Rick Scott getting it over 10. I did have Ted Cruz getting it just under 10. I even had Bernie Moreno pulling it out by 5 points. I had Sheehy over 10 in Montana. I had Casey losing it in Pennsylvania. But of course, Wisconsin and Michigan, those were wrong. I did have Maryland getting down under 10 as well. I thought Hogan would probably do his best if he got it down to about a 7.5 point loss. So he may have exceeded my best case expectations. Also in this scenario, I thought Nevada could flip as well as Arizona, but it would be by a tilt margin. This would have been the red tsunami Republicans were hoping for. Looks like it's going to be just a little bit under this, but they came close in several other seats. I also did my prediction for the governor's races. Some of those margins were off a little bit, but all the calls were correct. And I also did the U.S. House. Everything is not final with that yet, but I did have the Republicans at 220 seats in my final prediction. So that's how I did on my predictions. All the videos are there if you want to go back and take a look at them and hear my commentary. I happen to do pretty well on this election, definitely way better than the last midterms. I'm sure in the next one I'm going to get a bunch wrong. It happens. It's not a big deal. It's most embarrassing if you're locked in one direction or the other and then you're completely wrong. That's high risk and it's high reward, kind of like that Des Moines Register Seltzer poll in Iowa. I said they're either going to be the biggest heroes or the biggest villains. Looks like this time they're going to be the villains, which actually is not at all surprising from my point of view. Anyway, those are some of my maps. I'm sure you've got your own, so let me know in the comments, how do you think I did on these predictions? Of course, I'm showing them to you because I think I did pretty well. people don't really want to talk about their predictions when they're way off, I understand, but how did you do on your maps? Let me know down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.